Hello and welcome to Japan Expert Insights and our Wednesday morning room with Tim Sullivan and me, Maya Matsuoka, as your hosts and moderators. In this podcast, we welcome comments, questions, and opinions. So if you haven't done so yet, join us next time on Clubhouse. In the meantime, you can find us at japanexpertinsights.com and our YouTube channel, where we upload all the conversations on Japanese politics, business insights, and Japan's role in the Indo-Pacific region. Good morning to everybody. It's 8 o'clock and we will start the room. Kyoto, good morning. Thank you for being with us. To everybody here, I believe that you know Kyoto from his stories on LinkedIn and his book, Folk Tales of Japan, 28 Japanese folk tales with cultural commentary. Kyoto has a great storytelling talent, and we are grateful that he has agreed to be with us. Today, again, we're going to talk about this is the second session of Facepalming lessons from Japanese history, and we're going to talk about Maeda Keiji. I would say probably a charismatic character of Japanese history, but of course I'll leave this to Kyoto. There are a lot of things to learn from history, we all know that, and so let's see what we can learn from the life of Maeda Keiji today. Kyoto, without any further ado, let's start.
All right, thank you for the introduction. So thank you for coming, everyone, today. And as Maya has introduced, we'll be talking about Maeda Keiji. Maeda Keiji, I think the word Maeda, if you're familiar with Japanese history, I think you've heard that family name quite many times. But Maeda Keiji, he's not a big part of the mainstream drama that went on in Japanese history during this period called Sengoku period. Sengoku literally means a country of war. So it was between, I think, 1460s and right up until the end of the 1500s. So it was like 150 years of internal warfare. And Maeda Keiji was born towards the end of that period. I picked him up because he has, although he is not a big part of mainstream drama, he has a lot to share. He has a lot of implications and life stories, life lessons that we can learn from. And I'm very, very happy that I could have a chance to bring this up to you today. All right, so Maeda Keiji and Kabuki. Kabuki is a familiar term for, I think, all of us. Actually, Maeda Keiji and Kabuki are related, just a little bit. So I'm going to talk about that before I go into his life story. So this one I wrote in my introductory Instagram post, but before it became a performance art in the early 17th century. So Kabuki was a term used to label people who dressed and misbehaved, usually, extraordinarily. So while all acknowledgement, sorry, I didn't say that. I would say these kabukiists, I'm going to call them kabukiists. Kabukiists were basically the equivalent to gangsters to the Western world. Right, so as you can imagine, when you think about gangsters, so men in the middle to early modern ages, typically wore very conservatively colored and conservatively patterned kimono. But kabukiists, these gangsters, would fling on women's kimono with showy patterns, or they throw on like baggy trousers with fur sewed on. So they would wear their hair big, they can't do an afro because their hair is mostly straight, but they still, put a lot of wax and they wore big. And they hold like these astonishingly long katana swords, like, 3 meters long. And they would put them in 3-meter long sheaths that were bright red or bright blue, and they would smoke tobacco through these exceedingly large pipes. Okay, so as you can imagine, they're trying to stand out. They're trying to be on center stage of town, wherever they were. So kabukiists would often stroll around cities in groups. They inflict violence on civilians sometimes, And they inflicted violence mostly on other kabukias because they were gangsters, and they caused all sorts of trouble. Their existence was, I think, an outcry over Japan's transition from the bloody and violent but liberal Sengoku period, the war-infested period, to the peaceful and civilized but constraining Edo period. So, they were complaining about it. Okay. So Maeda Keiji was a samurai who became an early kabukiist when he found that he was not cut out for the corporate samurai world. So early on in his life, he was adopted as the heir of Maeda Toshihisa. Maeda Toshihisa was the head of the Maeda samurai family in the mid-1500s. And Keiji was married to Toshihisa's daughter, and it was clear to anyone's eyes that he was going to be the next clan master, the next CEO of the Maedas. Except that did not happen. So the feudal samurai lord, Oda Nobunaga, he's the biggest figure in mainstream Sengoku drama. Oda Nobunaga, he was the big boss of the Maedas. Okay, Maedas were one of many feudal lords serving for Oda Nobunaga. Or sorry, I shouldn't say feudal lords. They were samurai lords who were serving Oda Nobunaga. So Oda Nobunaga suddenly dictated that Toshihisa retire and let his brother, Maeda Toshiie, who is Keiji's uncle, so he had Toshiie take over as the CEO of the Maedas. So in the samurai world, family matters like inheritance and marriage were often determined by a higher authority. So you didn't get to choose who you wanted to marry. Your boss decided who you would marry. So whenever such decrees were issued, regardless of whether they liked it or not, samurai often bowed to fate and just dealt with it, just went with it. So I'm going off on a tangent here and then come back to Keiji, but until the late 1900s, when the average Japanese worker was employed at a single company throughout his career, and calling quits midway was not considered a viable option. So a similar phenomenon was going on as the samurai world. So male employees with a wife and kids living and working peacefully in a city like Tokyo or Osaka, one day were told to transfer to a branch on the other side of the country. They then adjusted their lives with the grace period of a few months by either arranging housing and schooling at the destination for the whole family, or arranging a lonely solo debut for themselves in the family if the family refused or couldn't comply with the move. So I actually met a Japanese man in his late 30s who said he was transferred to Singapore and lived apart from his family, including an infant daughter, whom he hardly got to see until she was like 4 or 5. Because they just deal with this. So although it happens much less now, thanks to global values influencing the Japanese corporate world, Japanese corporate soldiers and samurai have had quite many things in common. Right. So, for example, I think, Tim, you've worked in the Japanese corporate world, so you might have seen something similar. But so Maeda Toshie was the new CEO of the Maedas, and Maeda Keiji, because of his decree to step down, he had to step down, and there was no arguing against that. Okay, so Keiji wasn't Toshie's adopted son. Right, he was adopted to the Maeda family, but he was not adopted to Toshie's. So he was not a real son, so which Toshie already had. He already had a real son, so there was no way Keiji was going to be the heir anymore. So Keiji was abruptly demoted to a nephew of the CEO of the Maedas, as if the career ladder he was climbing was like pulled away all of a sudden. Imagine how that would feel. So his uncle Toshie proceeded to become the head of one of the biggest samurai clans there ever were, with a vast territory of 1 million goku. Goku is like a unit of measurement for the productivity of a territory. So 1 goku meant the land could produce enough food to feed one person for a year. So Maeda Toshie's 1 million goku was large enough to produce food for 1 million people. Meanwhile, Maeda Keiji was allotted just 7,000 goku. So Keiji served Toshie for over a decade, and he contributed to winning many battles. His bright red spear and armor that remain today suggests that he liked standing out during combat. Or rather, my guess is that it was important for him to display his talent in combat to override everyone's understanding of him as a half-baked CEO who never made it to the top, which is very sad, right, for him. It's said that he was not as obedient as a samurai would typically be. So nobody knows how Keiji actually felt about his circumstances, but this little story that I'm going to tell you right now, um, this little story about his last day at the Maida family hints at the resentment he must have been hiding behind his loyalty. So one cold winter day, okay, so Keiji invited his uncle Toshie to his house. And he says, "Uncle, I'm sorry I hadn't been an entirely supportive nephew for all these years. I now understand the hardships and pressure you have had to deal with as leader of us Maidas. So I've drawn a bath for you today. Please freshen up, and then we shall have a good talk over some tea." Right? So Toshie had been reproaching Keiji's delinquent behaviors and trying to straighten him out for decades, right? So he was moved, like almost to tears. And when he felt his guidance toward Keiji had finally reached somewhere in his heart, right? So Toshie had stepped into a wooden bathroom. It's snowing outside. Keiji was there, checking the temperature of the bath with his arm. He's swirling his arm in the water, and he says, "Uncle, the bath is ready." Right? And then Keiji left. As Toshie took off his clothes, the air was cold, but Toshie's heart was warm. He dipped himself into the bath, only to find out it was ice cold. Right? That son of right. But we don't know what Toshie actually said. This story may be fiction altogether, but what's important is that people understood Keiji's relationship with the Maeda family like this. So they represented their understanding of Keiji's relationship with the Maedas through this little story. Okay, so I feel this is half true, half fiction. I think it's a little exaggerated, but anyway, Keiji left the Maedas. He rode on his horse. He happened to have the fastest horse in Japan. So, of course, the Maedas were trying to catch him, but he would run away so quickly off to Kyoto, and he never returned to his family. So, according to historical records, Keiji was at least 50 years old and had a wife and 3 or more kids at this time. So, I think that's one carefree early retiree. So, Keiji loved attention and hated injustice. So, after he moved to Kyoto, his desire to live a kabuki superhero life was greatly amplified. He rode around the city on his extravagantly decorated horse to draw attention, and he looked for ways he could help the weak. So let me give you some examples of the anecdotes that are left with us today. So when he heard the head priest of a very established temple was a big snob who was very unkind to townspeople. So Keiji, disguised as a pilgrim, he dressed up like a monk with the straw hat, and challenged the snob to a match of Go. Go is a 2-player strategy board game where each side takes turns placing black and white stones, right? So he challenged the snob to a match of Go. They agreed that the winner would slap the loser after each match. Okay, so Mr. Snob, he's good at Go, so he won the first game, so he slapped Keiji's forehead lightly. Okay, and then Keiji won the next game, and he delivered a full-blown punch in the priest's face. So, that's how he solves problems. So another day, so Keiji came across an arrogant shopkeeper who kept chatting loudly while throwing his legs out in the store, so blocking everyone's way. So he was the equivalent of those part-timers who would keep conversing on their phones while keeping a customer waiting to check out. I think you've seen that before. So Keiji asked, he was looking at the thrown-out legs, and he asked, "Are these legs for sale too?" The shopkeeper snickers, and he says, "I'll sell them to you for 100 kan. Kan is a unit of money. It's around $80,000 in today's money. So, okay, I'll sell them to you for 100 kan. He's being a dick here. So Keiji replied, "Okay, deal." And he drew his sword and held down the shopkeeper's legs. So the shopkeeper begged for mercy on the ground on all fours. And it's said that his attitude changed 180 degrees thereon. Okay, so Keiji spent the rest of his life, not the rest of his life, but the rest of his time in Kyoto as a retiree learning tea ceremony and poetry. He was already good at that before he came to Kyoto, but he met all these tea masters and royalty through his connections that he magically had. So, but at around age 60, he decided to go back to the corporate samurai world. So he declined job offers from various samurai families. He was getting job offers from various samurai families, but he kept declining them until he applied for a job under Uesugi Kagekatsu. He was an influential samurai feudal lord of what is now Niigata Prefecture. So Uesugi Kagekatsu was known to be a humble, conscientious man of few words. And apparently Keiji loved this guy. Okay. So just to give you context, this period, the Sengoku period, was a very bloody age of nationwide battle royal among samurais. So not only was there like war almost daily between feudal lords across the country, but there was also fierce competition within each feudal domain. So sons killed or exiled their fathers, brothers assassinated brothers, and staffers overthrew bosses. Right? So almost no samurai could fully trust anyone and sleep tight at night in such chaos. Right? So during this time when power grabbing and like conspiracies were common, or even expected among samurai feudal lords, Kagekatsu always acted on the principle of justice. Okay? So in fact, the Uesugi family had been known for coming to the rescue of their allies consistently, even when that meant big self-sacrifices on their end. So Uesugi Kagekatsu is among this lineage of Uesugis. Okay, so Keiji, I'd say he basically had a man crush on Kagekatsu. So I think what impressed Keiji was how his new boss was so principled while being in power, unlike any other leader. Right? So Keiji behaved like a mocking kabukiist in front of all authorities, like except Kagekatsu. Okay, he was a good boy under Kagekatsu. Okay, so then came 1600. This year was the definitive showdown between the two largest samurai families of Japan. The Battle of Sekigahara happened in 1600. So all samurai families had to choose a side between West Japan, which was led by the Toyotomi family. So Toyotomi West, let's call them Toyotomi West. And they had to choose between that, or East Japan, which was led by the Tokugawa family. So Tokugawa East. Toyotomi West and Tokugawa East. So let me give you the background of the Battle of Sekigahara because it will help to understand the personalities of Uesugi Kagekatsu and Maeda Keiji, and also how uninterested Keiji was in this epic turning point of Japanese history. So the Battle of Sekigahara broke out in response to the death of the late dictator Toyotomi Hideyoshi. Hideyoshi was a gifted, self-made samurai who climbed up the ranks from being a peasant to the ruler of Japan. So he brought all other samurai feudal lords to their knees with his charismatic leadership and therefore established peace, right, in Japan. But when Hideyoshi died, his son was like 5 years old, so it wasn't clear who should lead the country. The leader of West Japan, Toyotomi West, was called Ishida Mitsunari. He was a most intelligent general affairs director, I would say, a general affairs director, and the most trusted advisor of Toyotomi Hideyoshi. So he stood up to protect the Toyotomi regime after Hideyoshi's death. So we could tell how loyal Mitsunari was. Okay, so Ishida Mitsunari is the leader of Toyotomi West Japan. But from the eyes of most samurai feudal lords, Mitsunari seems to have been a cold-blooded dick with zero people skills, right? The common understanding we have of Mitsunari's personality today is that he was just trying to do his job a little too diligently and efficiently. So he was the type of person who would write very blunt and direct work email messages with no hint of warmth whatsoever, because to his mind, probably adding a personal touch meant adding redundancies. It was either that or he was just too busy to care. So his sometimes cruel decisions and actions were all based on his unyielding loyalty to the Toyotomi family. We need to know that. So from Mitsunari's standpoint, the death of Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who he is like 100%, 120% loyal to, the death of Hideyoshi meant the throne should certainly go to his son, Toyotomi Hideyori, 5-year-old. But the Toyotomi regime had become unpopular by the time Hideyoshi died because of his last-minute ambition to invade the Korean peninsula. Nobody wanted to do that. It's very probable that Hideyoshi was worried that the feudal lords under him would be reluctant to serve his son, who was just born and had zero charisma. So he tried to secure their loyalty by securing new land he could bestow. Right? So, but the campaign on the peninsula was, of course, cancelled midway when Hideyoshi died in 1598. They would say, like, thank God he's dead, and then they would come back to Japan. So, and just as Hideyoshi had thought, many feudal lords lost their motive to stay loyal to the Toyotomi family and took sides with Tokugawa Ieyasu, the Tokugawa family, the leader of East Japan, Tokugawa East. Right? So Ieyasu was, in fact, entrusted the governance of Japan by Hideyoshi after his death, because Ieyasu was basically number two. Okay, so he had a lot of charisma, he had a lot of influence. He was the guy who knew what he was doing the best. So Hideyoshi entrusted power to Ieyasu on the condition that Ieyasu stayed in control until Hideyori came of age. Okay. But of course, as an experienced feudal lord, in this bloody Sengoku era, who had survived this hellish samurai world for nearly 60 years, Ieyasu was of course not going to miss this chance to rise to power. So the 25 or so feudal lords in different parts of the country, and everyone working under them, placed their bets on either the Tokugawa East or the Toyotomi West. Okay, so being on the winning side would mean joining the ruling class of a new era. Being on the losing side would probably mean unemployed in the new era. So even some of the most tenured Toyotomi West feudal lords sided with Tokugawa East. Right? Some feudal lords even split their families in half to side with both East and West, so that half would definitely survive. Okay, so it was a very, very, very serious decision for many feudal lords. So the concept of loyalty went out the window, and cold-blooded and unpopular Mitsunari taking the helm for the Toyotomi West was an additional reason for feudal lords to leave and to side with the Tokugawa East. All right, so now let's talk about Kagekatsu. So Kagekatsu saw through Mitsunari's awkward social behavior and had become one of his very, very, very few friends. And as a man of justice, Kagekatsu sided with the Toyotomi West, probably because that was the ruler he had oathed to serve in the first place, and betraying them just because things weren't looking up was not right. So Keiji was apparently indifferent to all this mainstream drama and was only thinking, Uesugi Kagekatsu, you're the man! That's all he cared about. That's all he cared about. So Kagekatsu, backing up his friend against all odds, grasped Keiji's heart. So Keiji willingly joined the Uesugi family's campaign as Toyotomi West, to take down a castle of a samurai family that sided with the enemy, Team Tokugawa East. So this was over 600 kilometers away from the main battlefields, which was Sekigahara. But anyway, he joined the battle to attack a castle of Team East. Okay. Now, unfortunately, due to a few last-minute betrayals, Toyotomi West lost the Battle of Sekigahara in just a matter of 6 hours. And Mitsunari and his men retreated, or rather, they ran for their lives in all directions. Mitsunari was found and captured in a mountain just 3 kilometers up north of Sekigahara and was killed the next month. Now, Kagekatsu withdrew his men and Keiji. So Kagekatsu and Keiji, they withdrew their men from the castle they were attacking because obviously the West lost, right? So Keiji, during this retreat, he willingly served as a rear guard, which was not everyone's favorite role because it often led to death, right? So it's the role where the person, the rear guard, holds enemies back while your allies retreated, right? So it's the most dangerous role in actually the Sengoku period. But he happily did it because he loved Kagekatsu. So it's said that he pushed back enemy forces with his red 5-meter long spear and managed to let everyone make it back to the Uesugi home ground safely. So he was actually a very, very talented soldier. And he's 60 here, right? Okay, so just FYI, he's 60. And the Tokugawa family soon ruled over Japan, and all except a few samurai feudal lords who were on the opposing team, Toyotomi West, they got killed in battle. They got sentenced to death. They got sentenced to harakiri. Harakiri is suicide by stabbing one's sword into his own stomach, which was considered an honorable type of death. But death is death, right? So people who were on Toyotomi West, they were killed, sentenced to death, sentenced to harakiri, or exiled, or pulled down from their positions as feudal lords. They just became unemployed samurai, or got their territories reduced. And Uesugi Kagekatsu was given the punishment of trading his territory which was worth 1.2 million goku, with a lesser one, which was worth only 3,000 goku. So 3,000 goku is like less than half of what Keiji used to have as Keiji was not even a feudal lord. Right, so that was a big humiliation for the Uesugis. But of course, they were on the losing side, and that was the consequence. So Keiji obeyed the mandate. Kagekatsu obeyed the mandate because he's a man of justice. He thought, okay, but I was on the losing side, and this is what I deserve, right? So he obeyed the mandate, and he moved to a province called Yonezawa, with his entire staff, although most other samurai clans that suffered a cut in income conducted layoffs accordingly. Right? So he probably thought it wouldn't be fair to make his staff pay the price of the consequences of his own decision making. So this very principled governance model of Kakikatsu's was passed down for generations in the Uesugi family. And in fact, his descendants left us a few other heartwarming historical episodes, which I think I'll talk about in the book I'm writing right now. Now, meanwhile, my guess is that Keiji's man crush on Kakikatsu was amplified tenfold as a result. So, because he didn't conduct layoffs. So Keiji declined a 7,000 Goku offer from another samurai family, and instead he decided to move to the province of Yonezawa along with the Uesugi family. Keiji had made close friends among the Uesugi bunch, so those were the reasons he moved, and he probably didn't even receive 100 Goku after he moved to Yonezawa. So Keiji built a little home that he called Mukuan outside the walls of Yonezawa Castle. He wrote poetry, he mingled with locals, and he spent the rest of his life there. And he wrote about his life at Mukuan in his diary. And here's my translation of what he actually wrote. I have no parents or children I need to look after. I am in no way a respectable monk, but I shave my head bald because mornings are easier that way. My limbs are healthy and no assistance is needed. I haven't gotten sick or relied on medicine. Yet, there are things in life that are out of my control. But like clouds that pop up from behind a mountain, unanticipated events come with charms of their own. As long as I indulge myself in poetry, seeing the moon wax and then wane, and seeing the flowers wither, don't disappoint me. When I'm sleepy, I would sleep until noon. When I have an idea, I will wake up at night. I'm not obsessed with going to heaven, but I also have not done anything that would send me to hell. When I live life until my time comes, I think I'll simply die. That was his writing, but if I may add just one final sentence to summarize what I believe Keiji concluded through his life, he probably meant to say, and that's all okay. It's all okay. So he was adopted away from his real family and into the Maeda family. He was removed from the position he was promised to attain. Keiji, during his very long youth, that lasted like 50 years or so, he must have felt he constantly needed to fight the fear of admitting that he was being neglected. So perhaps his eccentric and sometimes delinquent behavior was him trying to tell himself that he was cast away from his family and the corporate samurai world because he was different. Not because he was unwanted. I'm cast away because I'm different, not because I'm unwanted. I think he was trying to tell that to himself. And then he ran into people who wanted him around. They weren't his family, nor were they people from his hometown, and that was all okay, right? So to wrap this up, the spring, not hot spring, but a spring of fresh water beside where Mukuan stood is said to have provided drinking water for Keiji until he died. The spring is called Keiji Shimizu, and the water is still drunk and used by local farmers in Yonezawa City today. And of course, Maeda Keiji is a figure people of Yonezawa loves dearly until today. So that's it for the story of Maeda Keiji. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kyoto. Wow, this was really something. Well, first and very insignificant thing, but when when you were reading about the last, the time when Keiji actually found peace and decided that he would shave his head because the mornings were easier that way, I could very, very much relate to that. Yes, anyway. So thank you for that. And well, what a great story. And once again, we have had quite a few comments in the room chat about being philosophical and how actually the Japanese corporate culture nowadays it still resembles the world of the samurai and how the dynasties operated and how people actually acted and interacted with each other at that point. Yes, thank you, Gabor. So for you, Kyoto, congratulations, excellent presentation.
Thank you very much. Did we see any questions? Maybe. Oh, but a lot of comments. Thank you, Binati-san. Thank you.
Yes, a lot of comments. Very few questions, actually. So this is great, yes. But Tim, if you have any comments, of course, Timothy, if you do, please let us know.
Yes, I was going to say, you stole my thunder about shaving your head in the morning, or shaving your head because the mornings are easier because years ago, about I don't know, maybe 17 years ago, I moved to Hawaii, and it was so hot, and I shaved my head, like completely shaved it. And it's one of the extra side benefits that I didn't anticipate is that the mornings are easier when you have a shaved head. You don't need to buy shampoo. You don't need a comb. It's cool in the tropics. So there were a lot of, minimalism. So for me, now I can say I have something in common with a, samurai slash monk. So, and in terms of the, you alluded, Kyota, to the Tanshin Funin. And of course, I saw that, because I was dealing with Japanese corporations in the US. And early on, a lot of the salarymen who were assigned there brought their families, but these were the larger, top tier companies, and some of the suppliers lower in the food chain just didn't offer the same benefits. And then I saw a transition while I was there, and to save on costs, I think a lot of companies started sending younger Japanese salarymen who did not have kids, so they didn't have to deal with the Tanshin Funin. But I just a quick comment because the parallels are really interesting, and I like the way you drew those parallels. So thank you for that.
That's right. So you actually witnessed a tradition that's as old as 500 years, I guess. That's pretty.
Yeah, and some of the interesting thing was some salarymen would actually brag about it as a badge of honor. And one of the guys I worked for used to joke that he had been in the U.S. for 7 years, and he only occasionally went back to Japan. And he thought it was hilarious. He'd tell people, "Yeah, when I go back home on occasion and I go back into my house, my apartment, my daughter looks at me and says, 'Mom, there's a strange man at the door.'" That was so it was interesting that he almost wore it as a badge of honor. That's why I'm a samurai salary man doing this for the kaisha. So
Right. Yeah, they like, I don't know if it's because they have to find some good in this, or they generally enjoy it. But Japanese people, they like accumulating these sad stories so that they could make jokes off of that when they go out to nomikais, when they go out for a drink. It's like Japanese aesthetics and also humor has a lot to do with sadness, sorrow. The term is called mono no aware, but it still carries on until today. And this Tanshin Funin, these solo debut in another country or another part of the country, um, it's a great source of these dad jokes, these sad, sorrowful dad jokes, sorrowful Japanese dad jokes, which are popularly exchanged in the drinking places. I think that's interesting.
yeah, and some of it, yeah, I think as you alluded to, it's kind of bragging about the suffering you're going through, to show everybody that there's a little doryoku going on. The effort is there, and you're sacrificing yourself for the greater cause. In this case, for the company's mission. So for sure, that's
Yeah, and for Keiji, so he shaved off his hair, which I believe used to be very big, right? Because he was a kabukiist. So shaving that off, I think it was a symbol telling himself that it's okay. You don't have to fight for recognition. You don't have to fight for recognition because it's not important. Anything that happens in life, whether you like it or not, it has some beauty in it. That's what he realized. He was enlightened at the end of his life, and looking back at his younger self. When he was dressing up in like odd kimono and in odd fashion. So I can't help but think about Harajuku. So during the Sengoku period, when things were starting to calm down, and a lot in the Edo period too, there were not a few people who were outcasts of Japanese society. Not like they're criminals, but necessarily, but they would dress like kabukis, not as exaggerated as the kabuki actors we see now, but they dressed very, very oddly, and they wore big katana swords. If they didn't have a katana, they made like 3 meter long wooden katana swords, and they hung them in on their waist. And I think Japanese society, it's very peaceful and very orderly, but of course there are prices to pay for that to attain that, and that is if I say freedom, it's a little too vague, but it's the acceptance of oddities or rarities, I should say. People there are, because we are made via a spectrum of gene patterns, DNA patterns. Now, there are, of course, people who are on the tails of what you call the bell curve, right? So there are, of course, always people who don't quite fit in, and we need an outlet for those kind of people. And I believe like kabuki and people who acted like kabukiists, they kind of relieved people's frustration they had of living this orderly life in this peaceful Japan. And Harajuku, I think, is I went there, like, I don't know, 2 months ago for the first time in like 3 years, and people were dressed extravagantly, more extravagantly than ever. And I thought, it serves that place. It's like Halloween every day, so it serves as a place, as an outlet for these people who don't quite, feel comfortable. They're not like in the dead middle of the bell curve. They need some, it doesn't have to be every day, but once a week, once a month, once a year, they need a relief of a release of their wish for freedom, right? To wish to express themselves. So I thought, Harajuku, it's not my cup of tea, but I think it needs to exist, and it's an important outlet for especially young people who find it very difficult to learn to, what do you call it, live happily in in peaceful Japan. So that's what I thought through. Yeah, learning about Keiji.
That's a great parallel. I agree with you. It's almost like a social pressure valve to have the folks, like you said, on the tail end of that bell curve acting weird and crazy, and maybe just one little difference is often when I go to Harajuku, the people who are dressed in a crazy way often do it with a friend. They often do that. They display that craziness still in a group. But Keiji sounded like he was choosing to be the nail that sticks up. And it's funny because all cultures have the nail that sticks up, but in my culture, it's encouraged. You're encouraged to be the nail that sticks up. And the way that we try to deal with it socially is, everybody, we have to accept, diversity. And I'm not saying that's bad, but I'm saying that's one cultural solution to the nail that sticks up. And I heard one CEO in Japan a few years ago. I read an article. I can't remember who it was, but he was saying, it's time for Japan to have more nails that stick up because we need innovation. But instead of saying we should accept them, he said, if you're the nail that sticks up, you have to be utare zuyoi. You have to be tough because people are going to hammer on you, but you still have to endure, which is coming at the solution from a different perspective, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, and I also think that nowadays there is one more outlet, especially in the corporate world in Japan, the nomikai, and it is such a tradition here. I don't know whether there were any nomikais back then when Maeda Keiji was alive, but I have seen that nowadays, of course, in the office, everybody is very quiet and very careful to be and to, let's say, conform to the office culture. But once we go out and start drinking, after the second drink, everybody just shows their individuality. And that is where actually the other people in the team get to see you and get to know you. And at the end of the day, they accept your individuality and your strange, let's say, characteristics, if you have any. But that is the time when I have seen the most, and that is the time actually when I have seen how diverse the Japanese corporate world is. And of course, nomikai, they have a lot of functions here, but I cannot forget that colleague of mine we called him Mr. Stoneface, because he never actually changed his facial expression while he was in the office. And when we went drinking after work, after the second mug of beer, he would just change entirely, and he would become that very outgoing, outspoken person. And he would sometimes also give advice in a very boisterous manner to everybody in the room, and there. So I think that, yes, this is just one more way for people to let go and, to become accepted. But I wonder how, Kyoto, if you have any idea, maybe if you don't have that idea now, but maybe we can talk about it, in the future, the origin of nomikais here in Japan.
Origin. I might have researched that like 3 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if I can remember it off the top of my head.
Well, maybe we can have a room about this later on,
Yeah.
because it's still a big part of the corporate culture here. So, but that's, because we were talking about Maeda Keiji, and then the outlet that people need to actually show their real selves. And then this is one thing from my experience, that another outlet actually for the people who have to comply to all the rules and regulations and unwritten expectations in
Right.
the office.
Yeah, there were actually nomikais in the Sengoku period too. There are records of Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who was on the west side. He would have many parties. He would call feudal lords living in different places of the country, and then they would act crazy. Like they would have companions. They would drink a lot. They would eat a lot. And like Keiji was invited to one of them, and there's an episode that says he was dressed like a monkey, and he would dance around, and he would sit on each feudal lord's lap, including Hideyoshi, which would be very, very disrespectful when they were on duty, and that would mean you would get your head chopped off. But during nomikai, that's okay. So, and just to add that he couldn't sit on Kagekatsu's lap because he had a man crush on him. But that's how love works. Anyway, so yeah, it was there. So I guess it is at least a 500-year tradition. When the corporate samurai world began, I think nomikais began. They needed an outlet. It has a lot to do with the concept of TPO, time, place, occasion. So in Japanese society, there's a lot of TPO. There's a lot of moments where you need to tell yourself, now is not the time. You have something to say, or you want to do something, you want to act crazy, but you need to always tell yourself, now is not the time. So when is the time? That's the nomikai, I think. That's my answer to your question, I guess, off the top of my head.
Thank you very much. And before before I give the mic to Yuka, so there is a question in the room chat from Gabor. Does Maeda Keiji have any present descendants? What's with the Maeda clan nowadays? Do they still exist?
Okay, thank you for the question. Maeda Keiji, he had children, but we're not really sure what happened to them. But the Maeda family, Maeda Toshie, who actually became the samurai clan master of 1 million Goku, his family went on as the Maedas. They went on up until the Meiji period. The class of samurai was discontinued in 1868 or 9, I forgot. And samurai feudal lords who had a lot of authority, like the Maedas, they became what do you call it? Not royalty, but they became they were knighted, right? And they had this special pseudo class. So the concept was everyone's equal because we are going to catch up with the Western world. Everyone's equal, but in reality, there were these pseudo classes, and the Maedas were classified in the pseudo class of the pseudo upper class. So their mansion is still here today in Tokyo, and it's actually near my house. The Maeda, the old residence of Maeda, it's free of admission. You can just go in there and roll on the mattress, roll on the tatami mat, and they have a small but beautiful garden. I think their family was kind of like disbanded. The upper class, the pseudo upper class, was disbanded. So the family was disbanded. So I don't know if the Maeda-sans we see today, there are many Maeda-sans in Japan. Some of them must be descendants of the Maedas. Some of them are named Maedas because of other reasons. So we don't know. But yes, you can visit the mansion if you want to. It's relatively close to Shibuya.
Thank you for that. That's interesting. Yes. So probably we can check that location. Yes, that location on Google. I guess that there is information about it online, of course. Yes. And Yuka, good morning. Oh, good evening to you, actually. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Maya. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Kyota, for another interesting session. This is becoming one of my favorite series. I apologize in advance if this question is coming from the left field, but I just, because you were sort of drawing analogy between samurai world and then the corporate samurai of these days, and I was just, I couldn't help thinking about the school these days in Japan. The fact is, because I just heard these statistics, these days 5% of elementary kids, they refuse to go to school. They just cannot bring themselves to go to school, toko kyohi. And I was just, that's kind of sad stat. And I was just thinking, is that because we, adults are sort of imposing some sort of like a, silent pressure to kids to be, the same with others. So what do you think of that? I mean, I'm sorry if this is, again, this is so out of blue, but like I said, I just couldn't help but, the thinking about that.
All right. Right. That's sad that 5% of elementary school students don't want to go to school, don't want to show up in class. I don't know. Here's my guess. Before, actually, during the Edo period, when education began, this was in like the 1600s, 1700s, children were born into roles. So if you were a farmer's boy, you were going to be a farmer. If you were a merchant's boy, you were going to be a merchant. If your family sold seaweed, you're going to be selling seaweed during your life. So at school, there were curriculums that were very focused on professions. So kids of farmers would learn just about farming, there was a curriculum for farmers, and for merchants there was a curriculum for merchants. So in a way, that of course that kind of robs your freedom of choice of career, but that was not a concept back then. So you were born as a farmer's boy, then you were going to be a farmer. So at school you learn about farming. So everything was directed towards one direction, and everything was in a way meaningful, right? It was working towards your becoming a full-blown farmer or a merchant. So at that time there was a clear direction, but now many international values are coming in, and we're now thinking, you can choose your career, right? And that's a great thing. But I don't think it's just Japanese education, but in Japanese education, there's no clear direction. You learn a little bit of everything. It's liberal arts, right? Which is, I think it's good. But there is less sense of direction compared to the other period in that sense. So I don't know if, elementary school students, they have access to the internet, for example, I don't know, or they have access to parents who have access to the internet. So they might be thinking, well, what's the point, right? I'm not going to use any of these things growing up. So maybe there's a less sense of direction that's causing people to question the meaning of going to school. So it might not be a negative reason where they just don't want to socialize, they just don't want to show up at school. Maybe they're just questioning, is this really, really worth my time? I don't know if elementary school students would think that deeply, but I don't know. If that's the case, then maybe it's a transitional period where we're trying to figure out something that works better in a new era. That's fine.
You handle my weird question very well, Kyota.
Thank you very much.
Kudos to you. I just thinking, so having some options can be very challenging, and at the same time, I was just talking with my friend that if I have a kid, which I don't, but I might say to my kids, if you don't want to go to school, you don't have to. I might say that, and I'm sorry, the parents, as amongst the listeners, but that could be an option, I think. But anyway, yeah, thank you. And Maya, please have your kid go to school. Thanks.
Yeah, no. As fate would have it, when I lived in Hawaii, my wife, one of her side jobs was we used to host Stoko, kids who didn't want to go to school from Japan, and they would come for like a month at a time, and we had a relationship with the local charter school, and we would put them in the charter school, and the goal was just for them to make friends and not worry about learning English or studying or being graded. And we had mixed results, but one pattern we noticed, and we had one really great success story, is most of these kids did not have an adult in their life who would have a conversation with them. And every night we'd have dinner together, we would talk, and this one particular kid, he was like 16 at the time, we talked to him, and he found out he loved movies and he wanted to be a director someday, but he had no one to share that dream with or anyone to encourage him. And he came originally against his will. His mom made him come. And by the time a month was up, he didn't want to go back. And he ended up going back. He asked his mom to send him to a different school where he could do a homestay in a foreign country. He ended up doing a homestay in Canada. He moved to LA eventually, started studying, director, how to be a director of a movie. So he didn't have a purpose, but part of it was because nobody was listening to him or engaging with him. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of kids in Japan, that might be one of the reasons they're lost.
Right. Yeah. I've actually met a few kids who were fortunately born in a wealthy family, so they could afford to send their sons or daughters to extracurricular school, namely English school, English conversational school, which I was working at a long time ago. And they were good kids, but they were not fitting in school, so they were not performing well in school, the corporate Japanese school world. But when they went abroad and studied in Canada, and Canada seems to be the hotspot there. So they came back like a year later. I saw him come back, and he thanked us for guiding him in that direction. He was all happy, and he was. I could see he was a successful guy. He was just not cut out to be successful in the Japanese corporate school world, but in other parts of the world, there are, of course, places for everyone, right? So now that we are connected globally, I think Japanese people, they should look a little outside, and when their sons or daughters are not going to school, it's not their problem. It's just they're not in the right place. Maybe that's a way of thinking.
Yes, thank you, Kyota. Right, Tim, I hope that this was a good response to your comment, and Yuka, to your comment as well. Well, Kyota, thank you so very much for your time today once again, for preparing to tell us about the life of Maeda Keiji. It was a fascinating story once again. We'll continue the conversation later on. Until then, we wish you a great day, also a very productive reminder of the week. And one more thing, if you're not connected with Kyota on LinkedIn or on Clubhouse, please do connect with him either here or there. You can connect with Atami team, with Tim Sullivan there, and with me as well. So we'll see you next week again. Take care and have a good day. Bye. Thank you for tuning in today. We will be on air next week on Wednesday at 8 a.m. Japan time again, so join us. Until then, you can find us at japanexpertinsights.com and our YouTube channel. If you want to stay informed about our upcoming events, follow us on Clubhouse, LinkedIn or Twitter. Again, we are looking forward to your joining us next week. Until then, stay well and make the best of the day. See you!